so let's get started. Manadív Galer a Corja is Misha Clornicorig, Ard Council na Héireann anseo in Austin, Texas. Agus tá an áthas ar an fáilte múra chu roiid go léir go dtí an ócáid speisiúlta sin chun féileadh an leabhar nua Famine Pots. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. My name is Claire McCarthy. I'm the Consul General of Ireland based here in Austin, Texas, but also responsible for Ireland's bilateral relationship with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. You're all extremely welcome to this webinar this afternoon to celebrate the launch of Famine Pots, a book that we in the consulate are extremely excited about because not only does it encourage us all to explore the legacy of the Choctaw gift, but importantly, it also challenges us, challenges some of our assumptions and narratives around that story. More of that shortly. Firstly, the Embassy of Ireland in Washington, DC, and all of the Irish consulates are really delighted to partner with the American Conference for Irish Studies on this and many events. And we're particularly saddened still in Texas that earlier this year, COVID caused the cancellation of the American Conference of Irish Studies conference, which was due to be held in Houston by our friends at the Flynn Center, the Flynn Irish Center for Irish Studies at the University of St. Thomas. But we must look forward. So to share some news on the 2021 conference, we're delighted to welcome Professor Malachy O'Neill, Provost of the McGee campus at the University of Ulster. Professor O'Neill, if you want to turn your camera on, and oh, there he is. You're extremely welcome this afternoon, or this evening, I think it is for you. And we are delighted to know that the conference is going to Derry and that you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Claire. Yes, and obviously delighted to join you on this occasion as well. Just a quick word on ACIS. You'll all be more than familiar with, I'm sure, but the American Conference of Irish Studies is, of course, the largest Irish academic organisation in the world, and we are delighted to be co-sponsoring these talks with the Embassy to feature some of the cutting-edge work that's ongoing in this field. And obviously, congratulations to the authors featured in today's event. More information is available on ACIS via the website, of course, which is acisweb.org. It's absolutely our delight, pleasure, and honour, and indeed privilege to be planning to host the event for 2021, the ACIS conference in Derry next June. 2021 is a major year for the northwest of Ireland. We get to celebrate 1500 years from the birth of our city region's patron, St. Columkill, but we also get to hopefully congregate together face to face once again in order to share our research, share our learnings, and share our experiences. At Ulster University, we're privileged to host the 2021 American Conference for Irish Studies, the national conference in Derry, which is, of course, the home place of peacemaker John Hume. Our event is inspired by the words of Seamus Heaney's The Cure at Troy, and we have chosen the themes of heritage, healing, and home for 2021's conference. So we really do look forward to you joining us, hopefully physically, but certainly virtually. And given the times that we're in, the conference will be planned as a hybrid event and with options for in-person attendance. Local and international rules, obviously, and regulations will apply, but we will certainly facilitate virtual attendance in whatever the circumstances may be. Conference events will include performances by local artists and both physical and virtual tours of local landmarks and cultural institutions. And we are now open. The call for papers has been open for some time. The deadline for submissions is the 15th of December at 5 p.m. That's Irish time on the 15th of December. And we do hope that you can check that out on the acis2021.com website, or indeed follow us on Twitter. It's AC Irish Studies, or indeed join our Facebook group, a very active Facebook group, which is ACIS 2021. So I think that's my 2-minute slot well and truly up, Claire. And Gurmila Moigav, befalchu war over leg in there and Glencha hugging.
Gurmila Mahagut on Tullav O'Neill. Thank you so much, Professor O'Neill. I know from my own very real experience. Derry is one of the most wonderful cities on the island of Ireland, and we wish you and your team every success with the conference and the build up to it as well. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and very best wishes for the conference.
Many thanks.
Great. So our intention today is to frame our main event of the webinar with an introduction, if you like, from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and a closing remark from Ireland. Chief Gary Batten of the Choctaw Nation is understandably extremely busy at the moment, given the COVID challenges that that Oklahoma is facing. So we send him and his team every best wish for the work that they are doing at the moment. But we are honoured that he asked to send a representative from the Choctaw Nation on his behalf. And Deanna, if you want to turn your camera on now, we are so happy to welcome Deanna Byrd, who is actually the NAGPRA liaison for the Historic Preservation Department in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And she's going to share some brief reflections with us. Fáilte, Deanna, you are welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Chumachukma. It's good to be here with you today on behalf of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. We are very excited about the launch, and I just wanted to share with you that it was rewarding 4 years ago to be able to dive into the history of this gift just a little bit more with the article in our Biskanik, the Itifabasa, about this gift of empathy. A gift to the Irish people not too long after we had suffered great hardship on the Trail of Tears to Indian Territory, and our hearts went out to the families with a similar pain and loss. And so this gift shared and bonded our two nations for many years, many generations. And I think that it's still relevant today, this connection with our unwavering faith and our dedication to our families, and both of us having rich, long-lasting culture. And so today I'm honored to be here to celebrate the two authors, Leanne and Padraig, for their book. And I look forward to all of the discussion. And again, thank you. We celebrate you.
Thank you so much, Deanna. We are honored to have you with us. And as everyone will have noticed, Deanna's attention to detail is quite something, in that she wore her Cork colours of red and white, especially for me, I would think, as I think I'm the only Cork person on the call. So thank you for that, Deanna, and everything else that you do. We're honoured that you were able to be with us today. So at this stage in the proceedings, I just want to point out a little bit of housekeeping and get ready to introduce you to our panel and to our host. As I'm sure at this stage, we're all getting more familiar with the online experience, but you can see that there is a chat function that is already quite active with information on the people who've spoken so far. There's also a Q&A function, and we actively encourage you to use those and to be active participants and to share this experience with us. I am going to hand over proceedings for the main part of this webinar to Naomi O'Leary, who is going to moderate the main portion of the webinar. So if I could ask maybe Naomi and the panelists to turn their cameras on at this stage so that they get ready. Many of you, of course, are already familiar with Naomi from her work in the Irish Times, and of course from her podcast, The Irish Passport. This year, Naomi, of course, reached a new audience, or at least an audience with a different interest, with her coverage of the donations from Ireland to Native American tribes inspired by the Choctaw Gift of Ireland. And Naomi is very able hands to steer the ship from here. Just a reminder to everyone again, please do use the chat and the Q&A function in particular from the outset. So put your questions in as we go along. Don't be waiting until you're asked again. But please do be respectful. We value difference here, and we really do learn from different points of view. And I can assure you that the panel that we have here today are not afraid to grasp nettles. So we as an audience are very fortunate that they will share those perspectives with us, but we will do so respectfully, and we will put our questions to them respectfully. So without further ado, Naomi, it's over to you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us for this fascinating event with a really excellent lineup of panelists who I'll quickly introduce. So for the discussion, on Famine Pots, we have Deanna L, who's an enrolled citizen of the Choctaw Nation and Aitson Distinguished Professor of American Literature and English at the University of Georgia. She's a multi-award winning writer, including the American Book Award for her first novel, Shell Shaker. Her most recent book, Savage Conversations, was published in 2019, and she's currently co-producing a documentary, Searching for Sequoia, with Ojibwe filmmaker James N. Fortier. Padraig Kirwan is Senior Lecturer in the Department of English and Comparative Literature, Goldsmiths, University of London. His first book was Sovereign Stories, Aesthetics, Autonomy, and Contemporary Native American Writing. He has published essays in a number of publications and is currently writing a monograph titled Unsettling Irishness, American Culture and Contemporary Irish Fiction. In 2018, he co-organized the 38th meeting of the American Indian Workshop at Goldsmiths. Then Peter D. O'Neill is Associate Professor in the Comparative Literature Department at the University of Georgia. He co-edited the essay collection, The Black and Green Atlantic, Cross Currents of the African and Irish Diasporas. And in 2019, his award-winning book, Famine Irish and the American Racial State, was published in paperback. He's currently working on a cultural history of white nationalism and Irish America, and also a biography of Irish American writer Dylan O'Brien. Last but not least, we have Jackie Thompson Rand, who's a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and Associate Professor of History at the University of Iowa, where she coordinates the Native American and Indigenous Studies program. Jackie is currently working on an examination of a tribe's self-determinative evolution in the second half of the 20th century. She's also working on a digital project called Indigenous Midwest on the post-removal Indigenous presence in that region. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate our authors of Famine Pots, which is a really fascinating contribution, I think, to the history and the cultural memory of the Choctaw gift. And I might start out by asking some of our panelists just to set out the historical moment when this all began. So perhaps I might turn first of all to Padraig Kirwan. This act of generosity happened in 1847. What's the significance of that year for Ireland? What would it have been like for an ordinary person living in Ireland in that year?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. It's great to be with you. So thanks everybody for coming along. Of course, the Great Irish Famine, or the Irish Potato Famine, takes place from about 1845 to 1852 approximately. And it's really a decimating moment in Irish history. So we know, of course, now at this remove that about 1 million people died, 1 million people left the island. So we have that huge diaspora afterwards. And basically, the potato is kind of a staple part of the Irish diet. And when the crop fails in 1845, it leads to this, catastrophic moment in Irish history. So 1847 is in some ways kind of the height of the famine. And that's the year when the Choctaw at Scullyville decide to gather together a small pot of funds, a small amount of money, about $172, we believe. And they send that at that point in time to Ireland. And of course, the way in which the money is disseminated is through various kind of famine relief funds. So it comes via New York and then it reaches Ireland. We believe that it comes to the Quakers. So our collaborator, Professor Christine Keneally, has really helped us to kind of follow the money, think about the money trail there. So that's kind of the general context on the Irish side.
Great, and perhaps to turn to Jackie, could we look at also the historical context on the other side of the Atlantic? Because as Deanna Byrd mentioned in her introduction, this followed a moment of great hardship for the Choctaw people, known as the Trail of Tears. Could you sketch out exactly what was this, that the decades that built up to 1847? I think, Jackie, you just need to press unmute because at the moment we can't hear you. And I might use this moment to also remind anyone who's watching, do pop a question in the chat box and I can integrate it as we go along into the discussion.
At this point, the Choctaws have been removed to Indian Territory. That began in different stages in the 1920s, but culminated with the treaty in 1830 and the removal, the Indian Removal Act that was pushed through Congress by President Andrew Jackson. And so the context is that they get to Indian territory. They've been deprived of all of their settlement goods. In other words, they have arrived without means, without food, very weakened. A number of people died, thousands of people had died. And so they get to Indian territory, and there still is not going to be, you know, it's not the promised land, in other words, I guess is what I want to say. It's about hardship. It's about trying to start again. It's about already like an influx of settlers and hostilities. And so they're struggling to get their lives back together after this terrible migration.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the figure of President Andrew Jackson, because of course, this reminds us that in this moment when this massively positive and generous act was done of sending money to Ireland, it was actually a lot of Irish involvement in that displacement. Like the figure of Andrew Jackson himself, he was the son of, I think, Presbyterian immigrants from the island of Ireland, from Antrim, and as well as the many ordinary soldiers would have been immigrants as well. So what kind of fresh, I suppose, perspectives do we have on this gift, like with the new historical context that we have now? I might ask Peter O'Neill if you wouldn't mind coming in on that one.
Sorry about that. I just forgot to pass the put on the mute. My chapter moves the story of the Irish and Native Americans further west to California, and I write about the Famine Irish Catholics, their priest James Bouchard, who's a Native American known as the Eloquent Indian, and the Chinese question. So as you say, it is a story about the unfortunate dark side, I think, of being a minority in America, and about how Native Americans and Irish immigrants sometimes find solidarity by participating in rhetoric, even riots against other minority groups.
Of course, the power of that gift and that the generosity, which I understand was an early example of international aid. It wasn't a common practice at that time, so it was something really quite pioneering. That has, because it came from a people who were in so much suffering themselves and who had so little, that has inspired people through the generations. And I might ask Leanne Howe, perhaps, could you tell us a little bit about the memory of the Choctaw gift and the ways in which, I suppose, it's been there's been cultural interaction with that down through the generations among the Choctaw people?
Well, I think there's from my generation and my age group, I think I was told this story about the Irish gift and and famine relief from my mother. You know, probably 35 years ago, maybe longer than that, she was cooking in the kitchen, and she said, you know, we'd given money to the Irish when they were starving. And so this conversation went on all throughout the preparation for the meal. And I'd never heard of it, certainly not in my education. And at the same time, it's such a powerful reminder of how stories are passed down. She told a story. And I know that she had gotten that from my uncles, who she'd recently seen. And so this kind of circular story came that way through me. I think that those are the kinds of public and private memorials that the Choctaw people have. And the gift, as my aunt would say, one of my older aunts, Gladys, would say, it's Ima, give, you know. And so it's a very, giving is one way I think the Choctaw people would say is our way of showing that we care for other people. You know, I care for you. And that has remained a constant in our history. I can go back to the 1730s and talk about the Choctaw giving relief to the French who were starving when they came to our shores. We took food to the Chitimaches once because they were starving. Those kinds of things are well documented in the history. So we fast forward then to 1830, 1831, and we hear about the struggles of other tribes. And then 1847 comes around, we hear again about the struggles of other people, and we send the gift, which is not even thought of necessarily as a gift. It is just a way, it's an expression. We are giving to help other people. And I think that's one of the core fundamental ways in which Choctaw people live our lives today. When there was a need during the North Dakota Access Pipeline, and someone correct me if I have that wrong, we sent money and firewood and food and all kinds of blankets to the Dakota people who were trying to protest for water rights, keeping the water clean. We send aid all around the state of Oklahoma. We've built roads, we've built cellars for schools. This is not part of any kind of legislation. This is something that the Choctaw Nation does for people in need. It is a core belief. It is a core principle that we uphold from the 1730s, when those kinds of things were documented, clear up until today. We are still giving. And I think that cemented the relationship with the Irish, because we have so many similar things in history. The English, the oppression of an English government, the oppression of the English once before they became quote unquote Americans. There was an oppressive nature to their relationship with us. And I think we see that in the cultural history of other nations around the world. So it seems to me this kind of historical context is something else that has kept our peoples together.
That's a fascinating point about cultural histories and also cultural memories, which we might perhaps come back to and explore some of the commonalities there. But a really good question has come in from Cathal Bale, which I might pose to Jackie, if you wouldn't mind taking this one. It's a practical one. How exactly did the gift originate, and how did the Choctaw people know about the famine?
Well, let me say a couple of things about memory and knowledge. I have to stress that the people who went to Oklahoma, who left Mississippi and went to Oklahoma through the Trail of Tears, a number of them had extensive contacts in the political world in Washington, D.C. These are our leaders who were very practiced in diplomacy. And so it wasn't as if our people were just isolated, from information. And I can't remember the scholar's name, but, has done a lot of work with newspaper accounts, and clearly, they're reading newspapers. So the people in Oklahoma, we have to remember there are people in Mississippi, Choctaw people in Mississippi, who remain there, and they're still there. So we're talking about the people in Oklahoma. And so the people in Oklahoma, the Choctaws in Oklahoma, had access to information. And I'm not an expert in this area of research, but my understanding is that they were part of the Quaker network, and the Quakers were really the people driving, getting information out about this catastrophe that's unfolding in Ireland. And they were instrumental in sort of channeling all these different kinds of donations into a pipeline, so to speak, that would make its way to Ireland. And it's really fascinating too, because of the economics of what's going on in Ireland, inflation and so forth. And so really there's an effort to send goods. So it's not necessarily as if, the people donating funds, their money actually lands in Ireland. It's coming through channels, philanthropic channels and philanthropic work. And this is all very early days of that kind of thing. And this is coming from all over the world. It's really a remarkable story that the world reaches out to Ireland. So our people were educated people. There was already a stratified society with sort of educated, economically successful people, sort of, at the top, and then lower income people, working all the way down to the truly impoverished. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Oh, I also wanted to just, if I could, just continue for 1 second. This whole thing about memory is interesting to me because it's really clear from the early contact in the it's 1990s, early contact, where the Choctaws in Mississippi, who the Irish first, there's some kind of link there. They had no idea about it. The Irish who came in contact with them had to teach them about the gift. So the memory thing is, I don't know, it's just something a historian would be interested in, I suppose.
That is fascinating. And I'm seeing an interesting chat going on here where Angus McNeil asked about the size of the population that we're talking about of the Choctaw people then and now. And Leanne has kindly responded that perhaps in this historic period, there might have been about 70,000 people, perhaps more. And today there's about 230,000 Choctaws with information on the Choctaw Nation website. There were a few interesting points there raised, which I might draw Padraig in on if he wouldn't mind contributing, perhaps about the international nature of the famine as, an early sort of example of the kind of international disasters that we're more familiar with hearing about today, that people were hearing about all over the world and kind of getting involved in. There were newspaper reports. To me, it's quite interesting that it's a time when some of the conventions of newspaper reporting were invented. So there's like interviews with, there's an interview with a starving woman, I think, called Bridget. It's one of the first newspaper interviews. It's quite fascinating. So Padraig, perhaps you could come in a little bit on that.
Yeah, you have a journalist's eye for that there, Naomi. That's a really great question. And I think going back to what Jackie is saying, in terms of the 19th century context that we're thinking about, of course, all of this information is kind of crossing over and back transatlantically. And we often think of, kind of sequestered or kind of limited positions and people not understanding, but that's not the case at all. And newspapers are a really important part of that. So we see packets, quite literally, kind of small articles or letters being sent from the US to America, to Ireland, and vice versa. So kind of news is being disseminated. And it's Annalise Hansen-Shrout, for anybody who's interested. And she has looked at both newspapers in Ireland, but also newspapers in Cherokee newspapers and various the Arkansas Intelligencer and other newspapers, and has looked at kind of the way in which the stories are being shared internationally about the famine, definitely between, I'll say, the tribal nations and the Irish. And as Christine's work has pointed out, the Irish famine is probably one of the first major international calamities that kind of gets everybody's attention. And money comes in from a huge array of places. It comes from India, it comes from the Caribbean, there's money sent from here, from the UK. Christine points out that even a prison ship in Woolwich at one point, that people who are there gather up money and send it to the Irish. And I think there's kind of an understanding of the level of deprivation and loss. And of course, Alexis de Tocqueville visits Ireland during the famine, and he writes about the famine in really kind of compelling ways. And interestingly and kind of uncannily, he has also witnessed the removal of the Choctaw in the early part of the 1830s. And he's written about that moment in history. And then he continues on to visit Skibbereen and parts of Cork where Claire will kind of be thinking about, you know, and sees the decimation that we see there. And some of the accounts of the famine, as you say, some of the interviews are truly appalling. And we only need to think about the fact that, you know, the Irish population from midway through the kind of, well, the early part of the 19th century to 1921, the population is halved. So it's this kind of, you know, it's a huge kind of moment of destruction. And I think internationally people recognize that. Internationally people feel ultimately compelled to do something. And as Leanne said earlier on, I think it's so important too, that in this current moment in the pandemic, we can kind of, probably that resonates with us in all kinds of ways. I mean, many of us were already interested in these kinds of moments of connection and empathy and affiliation between people and how we recognize each other and help each other. But I think obviously the current moment has kind of brought all those things right home to us.
Right, and I suppose it's that, you know, the extent of the devastation, the loss of population, and trying to struggle to the sense of losing language, losing culture and history. These are also commonalities shared with Indigenous people in the Americas. And a couple of interesting points were made about cultural memory, cultural exchange. And I think what Jackie has described as public history, if that's the right term, both Choctaw people and Irish people having a tradition of public history. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. Mike Casey has asked whether school children in Ireland learn about the Choctaw gift. I think some of them probably do. I don't know if every school child does, but certainly I think awareness has been refreshed by the monument in Middleton in County Cork by the artist Alex Pentek, which is very visually striking. It's a bowl of feathers, empty feathers. That really, I think, kind of there were ceremonies to open it, and it's kind of almost spurred a new generation perhaps of exchange because it's simply so powerful as an image. So perhaps I could perhaps turn to Leanne. You could tell us a little bit more about cultural memory. Of course, if any other panelist wants to come in at any point, do jump in.
I think it's important that we have and continue to tell stories so that the cultural memory is strong. And I leave that to other people. But as a writer, Padraig and I thought it was very important to create a book about this event. And it's really one of our early first conversations about the connection between the Irish and the Choctaw. And I had written about that in my first novel because I had elders who remembered the Choctaw sending money to Ireland for famine relief. And so it went into the very first novel I wrote over 20 years ago. And so we talked about that, and it is the impetus behind the book Famine Pots. We wanted to have a text in which we would have 4 Choctaw scholars and 4 Irish scholars really talking about what this means from a historical point of view, and also how it relates to a contemporary events, and certainly international cooperation. But really, I think the genuine expression of solidarity that the Choctaws had by giving money to the Irish for famine relief remains the central story today, and the connection between our two peoples. It is our desire to have this connection with people who we have relations with. It's just that strong, and at the same time, it is that authentic.
I would add a point here, and that is, it seems to me that, you know, the thing I like about this book so much is that it kind of points to sort of historical analysis, as well as the sort of cultural consequences of the resurrection of this whole chapter in our histories. And they're both useful. I like that. I'm sorry, we have the worst of these things. They're just horrible. And so we have really lots of opportunities around this in so many different directions, you know, opportunities for new scholarship, opportunities for relationship building. And already the impact has been felt here in the United States. When the virus broke out here in the spring, Native communities were very hard hit, and they weren't receiving the aid that they needed from the United States government. And so I don't know if you know this, but it was, you know, it was in the news here that there was an Irish donation to the Navajo people who were very hard hit, extremely hard hit by COVID. And then the Navajo people, in turn, acknowledged the Choctaw people for the original gift. You know, the world needs just a little bit more of this. And I also think it's, you know, it's vitally important to our relationship to just acknowledge these things. And one of the comments was how much the story resonates with Irish school children, which I just find, you know, very lovely. You know, history is another thing. I mean, history is complicated. When the Irish came into the United States originally, I don't study Ireland, but I know enough about Ireland too, through my studies about colonialism, that once upon a time the Irish too were categorized, and maybe still so in some kind of commentary, as, you know, savage people, that the colonial powers, the British government and politicians and people regarded them as savage because they were quote unquote tribal. So sorry. And so, you know, that struck me so much when I was much younger and I was reading about, you know, colonialism and that kind of thing. And so, of course, they suffered terribly under colonialism. They come to the United States, and as I write about in my essay, they come into the United States, and particularly into the Southeast, and they in turn colonize the American Indians who are there and cause great harm and put a lot of pressure on getting Indians out of the Southeast. They were one of the forces that was helping to push Indian removal, to get American Indians, specifically, you know, the 5 tribes, Choctaws, Cherokees, etc., out of the Southeast and into Indian Territory. Well, they didn't really care where they went, actually, to tell you the truth. And so, you know, we look at these things, and the whole history of the Irish in the United States is so fascinating in that they come into the United States, into US society, sort of carrying this taint of savagery. And they are regarded as, you know, non-white. So over time, like other groups who have come into the United States, they become whitened. So we've got just such a complex history.
That's right.
Take it away.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right, and it's what my article in the collection is about. I'm so grateful to Padraig and Leanne for including my chapter, because it's not on the Choctaw gift or what it is about. It's on the nature of racism in 19th century US, and how the Famine Irish, when we came over to Ireland, had to adapt. It was how the Irish became white, was how they became sort of American nationalists. I mean, the Irish were open to citizenship in the US. The first immigration law was in 1790. It said that one could become a citizen of the US if they were quote unquote free white persons. So race was at the very basis of citizenship in the US. But the Irish, you know, as Jackie says, were not, I would say, they weren't culturally acceptable, particularly the Famine Irish, because of their religion. And what they had to do was sort of earn their right to white nationalism. And how they did that in California was through leading the anti-Chinese demonstrations and movements in the 1860s and 70s. And you know, my chapter is about, you know, as I said earlier, a Native American pastor who aided and abetted and was quite, took a lead in the anti-Chinese movement out of solidarity, I suppose, with his flock. And it just shows the perversity, I think, of race and racial categories, and how, you know, how unstable the whole thing is, and how fluid racial identity was in 19th century America. And I think it's important to remember. I just want to bring in another O'Neill into the discussion. That is Eugene O'Neill. You know, there's a great line in Long Day's Journey into Night, spoken by Mary Tyrone. I think it goes, "The past is the present, isn't it? It's the future too." So, like, while we remember these great acts of solidarity, we also have to remember the uglier side of things. I think that, you know, white supremacy and the ultranationalism that feeds on it, it hasn't gone away. We've seen that in recent times. So how do we deal with that cancer? Well, we have to, the gifts, like we describe it in Famine Pots, these acts of solidarity, that's a way to deal with it. But we cannot fully appreciate the disease without looking at the darker side of it. And that's, I'm glad that, you know, my chapter has been included, so that we remember, you know, those stories, whether from Ireland or America, that make us uncomfortable, as well as those that offer us hope.
Absolutely. And speaking of contemporary events, I was very glad that Jackie brought up the gift to, or the giving to, the Navajo people during the COVID-19 disaster, which really took off in Ireland, and it's just kind of went viral. And I think it was something in the order of about $3 million that ended up being sent, which a good few people have actually mentioned in the chat. And what was nice is, because we've been talking about oral histories, is that something I found was that people loved to tell and share that story, because it was this really positive thing at a terrible time for everybody, when people were feeling very, you know, isolated and a lot of negativity. It was sort of this, you know, this transatlantic link, which was, you know, which I think that was all about the power of the Choctaws gift, you know, sharing that story once again, and bringing it to a new audience, and then it being repaid almost 175 years later.
You know, I just wanted to squeeze in a little comment here that I shared via email, but I wanted to share it with everybody. I was, I'm sorry, I was on Twitter. And so I was on Twitter, and I follow all these Native things. And this young woman somewhere, I can't even remember where, but this young woman had posted a photograph of this ribbon skirt, which is sort of now all the rage among, you know, young people, is they're just making all these ribbon skirts. They're beautiful. And she made a ribbon skirt in honor of the Irish gift to the Navajo. And it was just exquisite. It was just beautiful. She's just this young girl, you know? And so I just think, you know, we're living through a pretty tough time, and it's so nice, you know, just to be able to look at this little part of the world that is, you know, having a good relationship and a mutually supportive relationship.
It's nice. It also reminds us as well that, you know, there are other examples of Irish and Native American solidarity or moments of kinship, you know, with other people, like the visit of later President Eamon de Valera in the early 20th century, before Ireland was a nation. He went to visit the Ojibwe people and was named, according to a newspaper article at the time, as an honorary chief. And there was a ceremony with some quite striking photographs of him wearing a traditional feathered headdress, which it's quite, you know, it's quite, I suppose, historically appropriate that we have these sort of recurring cycles of connection. Padraig, did you want to come in? I saw you kind of nodding.
No, I'm really agreeing with everything. It's great to hear Jackie and hear everyone talking about these things, and it is so, you know, it is such a positive aspect of the story. I think it's a really important aspect of the story too, to think about that idea of the long, definitely the kind of tensions in history that Peter and Jackie have spoken about. They're really important. And we also need to recognize that, you know, Richard Hakluyt and very early figures like Sir Walter Raleigh, you know, they often refer to Ireland as a colony, of course, and they think, you know, comparisons are made in Hakluyt's work about the Irish, the wild Irish and the tribes in Virginia and so on. So there is kind of a shared, definitely shared long history, but then those kind of moments, those kind of discomforting, unsettling moments that Peter talked about, we need to think about those. But right now, I suppose, yeah, to look at that kind of long story and moments like De Valera's kind of act of solidarity, and to try and understand those senses of solidarity, I think is really important. Politically, and I think this is something that many of the contributors kind of commented on, politically as well as culturally, quite often there was kind of a currency, there was a sense of common currency between the Irish and many of the nations. So when we think about nation to nation recognition, and we think about the, you know, the sovereignty of the tribal nations, over 530 nations, 536, and us, you know, in 1920, when De Valera was thinking about the formation of the Irish Free State, and thinking about Ireland's place in a kind of a global context, and looking for moments of solidarity. And of course, what happened there, quite funny in lots of ways. Here's the, you know, the future Taoiseach of Ireland, who is born in New York, who then comes back to America, essentially looking for some kind of affirmation from Woodrow Wilson, and Wilson won't meet him. He actually turns down the meeting. So De Valera is kind of kicking his heels. He's raising money, and he's trying to decide what best to do next. And he makes contact with the people, the Anishinaabe, and he goes to visit. And he, you know, you mentioned this earlier on, Naomi, he talks about the idea of kind of language loss. He talks about the idea of political sovereignty and autonomy within the nation state. And of course, that all resonates with the people who he's visiting there. And I think these are important parts of the story. And we've spoken before about the fact that the Haudenosaunee, their passport was recognized by the Irish Free State very early in play, and kind of again looking for moments of kind of you know, affirmation in some ways, but also political recognition, which are really, really important. And it's another strand of the story, I think, which is a vital one.
Also, I think that what this just made me think of is there's so many times in history, as a historian, I get obsessed with these kinds of questions, but there's so many times in history where it looks like that's the story. In the 19th century, politicians, philanthropists, friends of the Indians, everyone said that by 1900 we would be gone. And they almost made it. By 1900, we had our population was 250,000. They were close. They came close to making it happen. But here we are, you know. And a long time ago, a linen maker's son crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Ireland and came into the Southeast and built a fortune in that country, in that territory, largely in part due to the Indian trade, which was very extractive and abusive toward Native people. And here we are in 2020, swapping feel-good stories about how we're nice to each other and mutually supportive. You know, this is just what always amazes me about history. You know, the story is just never over, and there is more to be written. I think we all have taken a note. We've all learned a lot of lessons from colonialism, and we've all learned a lot of lessons about capitalism, and we've all learned a lot of lessons about white supremacy. And you know, and so we are working with that now. I don't know. My mind just goes off on things like that.
I was quite interested to read one of the reviews on the back of Famine Pots, the book, which I have here, which talked about it as an act of post-colonial solidarity in itself by gathering these stories together and having this cultural exchange.
I think it's important that we keep in mind, and when we put the book together, that we had various points and point of views from the authors that we chose to be in this collection. And at the same time, the story is not finished, but what we can take from this moment, and I think it's extremely important to take what we can adapt in the 21st century, which is a spirit of generosity. And I find that missing in so much of what's been happening at the national level in the United States, is our lack of generosity. This will change, but I think that spirit of generosity has continued to live on, and I'm proud of that for our communities, and especially our Native communities, in being generous with each other. And that is what has saved us. And as Jackie was saying, we're still here, and we're still here because of that I care for you, the notion that there is a deep sense of caring in our communities. We're not perfect people, but historically, we've made some remarkable moves. And one of them was in our generosity of sending a small amount of money to Ireland for famine relief. And that's something that we can be very, very proud of today. And that reciprocal exchange from Ireland back to the Choctaws and back to other Native communities, I mean, is celebratory and monumental between our communities. So again, I'm just very proud of what we've accomplished, and very few people would have expected this to happen. And as Jackie said, they expected us all to die. and we did not die. Especially removal to a land that has no water. So that's why there's so many reservoirs in the state of Oklahoma, as they moved us here thinking that, well, there is no water and there's no food. So here we are.
It's with great reluctance that I have to wrap up, unless everyone has the briefest final comment to end on. We have come to the limit of our time of the panel discussion. But if anyone just had the last sentence, they could.
Well, I have one last thing to say. You know, it's the American tradition to bury the, you know, to forget about the past and sweep it onto the carpet. It's the Irish tradition to be obsessed with the past and, you know, and forget about the present. So I think this is a marvelous combination. I think it's a winning combination here that we have. So that's going forward. We'll remember the past and go forward into the future with some optimism.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you everyone. Thank you to all our panelists. And if anyone's interested in getting the book, there's discussion in the chat about where you can find it online and things like that. It's a really great achievement by all the contributors, including Padraig Kirwan, Deanna L, and many others, including Christine Keneally, Darren Grief, and many more. So congratulations to that, and thanks to all the panelists for a really fascinating discussion. I'll hand over to Claire.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, panelists. That was indeed a fascinating discussion, and we are extremely grateful to you all. Yes, there is information in the chat box about where you can buy the book, and we'll also be sharing information on our website and Twitter and all the rest of it after the event. One of the things that wasn't mentioned, one of my favorite aspects in the book, was that there are a few laughs in there as well. I'm still laughing at the contribution from Tim Tingle, who talked about hiring a car for his visit to Cape Clear Island, which any of the Irish people watching will know was a big waste of money on his part, because you can't take any cars on to Cape Clear Island. So there are some funny anecdotes in the book as well. We're delighted and honoured now to be joined by Ambassador Dan Mulhall. Dan, welcome, great to see you. As everybody attending knows, we started our event with a contribution with Deanna Byrd from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and we're honoured now to have the Government of Ireland's representative in the United States, Ambassador Mulhall, just to give us a few closing remarks, Ambassador, in terms of how you see things going forward, especially now as we're looking towards the 175th anniversary of the gift, you know, in 2 years' time, and your thoughts as we prepare for that anniversary. Ambassador, we'll let you have the closing word.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you to everyone who's contributed and who's taken part in today's event. I've been listening for the last half an hour or so, and I've been very impressed by the contributions and the discussion that has taken place. So let me just say that I've been to Durant in Oklahoma 2.5 years ago, or no, year and a half ago. I visited there with Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, and it wasn't my idea to visit there. It was the Taoiseach's own idea, because a few months before I'd met him, and he said to me, what are we going to do for St. Patrick's Day apart from the usual visit to Washington? And I said, well, you know, it's up to you. I made a few suggestions about, you know, places we could go, the usual places, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, etc. He said, no, he said, I want to go to see the Choctaw. I said, okay. And sure enough, a few months later, we made our way up to Durant from Texas, and we had a full day with the Choctaw Nation, and it was a marvelous occasion because we were extremely well received. We had cultural perform. We had a young Irish American musician from Houston playing the fiddle and singing, and we had some Choctaw music and dancing. We had some Irish dancing, and indeed. The Taoiseach tried to teach the game of hurling to the Choctaw, to our Choctaw hosts, and they taught us their game, which is with much more skillful game actually, with 2 sticks rather than 1. The hurley is a big stick. These are sort of fairly thin sticks, and an extraordinary amount of skill required to play that game. But anyway, we had a great day, and it was an eye opener because clearly their gift to Ireland had made a big impression on us, because our Taoiseach wanted to go and thank them 170 plus years after the gift, and they were delighted to receive us, and they recognized they had this connection with us, and they were very proud of it. And I think that's a very important part of the story, that it means something to both of us. It means something to Ireland. It means something to the Choctaw. And I always believe that anniversaries are a great opportunity to bring to light things that otherwise might be overlooked or forgotten or just buried under the incrustations of time, as James Joyce would put it. And this is one of those stories. It's a marvelous story, and it's one that has been sustained over the generations and still means something to both our peoples to this very day. So I mean, I'm glad that this book is a book that explores the relationship between Ireland and the First Nations of this country, because we know it's a complicated story. We know it's not all sweetness and light. That there, as somebody has been mentioned already in contributions from the panelists, there are some darker moments to that story, because the Irish did become part of an America that wasn't always hospitable towards, or that was hostile towards the First Nations of this country. I mean, the Irish story is one that we sometimes now forget, but it was one of, because of the success of Irish America over the last century or so, and, with Irish American presidents like John F. Kennedy, and another one to come now in Joe Biden next month, there's a kind of an assumption that the Irish were always, welcome guests here, but they weren't. And in the 1850s, for example, there were movements, nativist movements here, that regarded the Irish as a threat to the integrity of American society, and there were those who wanted to prevent the Irish from coming in. They wanted to deprive them of the right of citizenship. That all changed, I think, after the Civil War, when the Irish contribution to the Civil War, to the Union side in particular, meant that they could no longer be regarded as outsiders and had to be seen as part of the fabric of the United States. So the story is a mixed one, and by the way, I have no problem with that. I absolutely believe that we have to look at all aspects of our history. We can't whitewash things. We have to look at the grays and the blacks as well as the whites. I mean, in terms of the colors, it's not a case of history as a kind of a straight line, a straight virtuous line from bad to good. There are zigzags along the way, and there are times when things go into retreat. So there's a lot of gray in our history, and we know that from our own experience, because at the moment we're facing into a period of centenary commemorations of what happened in Ireland in 1921-22, with the advent of Irish independence, the War of Independence, the treaty, the partition of Ireland, and then the Irish Civil War. Difficult things to deal with. So we're used to dealing with the complexities of history, and that's what we have had to do over the last 10 years, dealing with the period leading up to the independence of Ireland in 1922. So I'm fully on board with being brave about looking at the history of the connection between Ireland and the First Nations, which has actually come into focus again this year, because Naomi is correct in saying that more than €3 million was donated from Ireland to support the Hopi and Navajo peoples who are suffering particular difficulties because of the coronavirus crisis. Also, I have a T-shirt here produced by the Iroquois Nationals, which has their symbol, the symbol of their lacrosse team, and also the words Untitled. And this was produced by the Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team in recognition. And Untitled, by the way, means together. We're together. And it was produced by the lacrosse team called the Iroquois Nationals, who represent the First Nations of the United States, of this country. And it was produced because Lacrosse Ireland voluntarily gave up its position in the Lacrosse World Cup of 2022 in order to allow the Iroquois nationals to take their place. And that generous gesture, I think, harks back in many ways to the Choctaw donation to Ireland in 1847. As we approach the anniversary, the 175th anniversary of that donation, I think we should hope to see a greater awareness in Ireland and here of that donation and what it has meant and the legacy of that donation, which continues to inspire links between the Choctaw and the Irish to this very day. So I want to, first of all, or finally, before I conclude, to say thank you to the American Council for Irish Studies, American Committee for Irish Studies, for their ongoing collaboration with the embassy and indeed with the consulate in Austin on this occasion. I want to say thank you also to Professor Malachy O'Neill and Deanna Byrd for joining us today and for supporting this event. To Naomi O'Leary for moderating, and of course I know Naomi from Twitter. I think we're in connection, we're in contact with each other on that great medium called Twitter, which I try to use to promote Ireland and to make Ireland's culture and history better known to my followers on Twitter. And of course, Naomi is someone who has a very fine podcast called The Irish Passport. You can't travel on Naomi's Irish Passport, by the way. You have to get a proper one through the embassy or the consulates. But those of you who have an Irish grandparent, one Irish grandparent, are certainly entitled to Irish citizenship and to an Irish passport. I'd like to also thank all of our panelists, Leanne, Padraig, Jackie, and Peter. And a special word of thanks to all of you who attended this webinar. And I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of the role of my colleague at the embassy, Ragnar Amquist, and to Cecilia at the consulate for their work. So look, my final word is that this is an ongoing story. It's been around for 175 years, and it will continue to resonate, I hope, in the years and decades to come. It's a great story. It's a positive story. It's the kind of story that lights up history in a positive way. There are many, very many grim, miserable stories that populate the history of the world, including the history of Ireland and the United States. And it's great to be able to celebrate and recognize a very positive story of genuine generosity on the part of the Choctaw Nation, now I think being recognized and reciprocated by Ireland in many, many ways, including our efforts, our ongoing efforts to reach out and develop our connections with the First Nations of this country. So thank you very much to everyone for making this event such a success, such an enjoyable and enlightening experience for everyone. Thank you, and a Merry Christmas to everyone if I don't have contact with you between now and the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks, everybody. And that's it. And if you can find the book in your local bookshop or the library, then that would be great. Thanks, everybody, for being here. All the best now. Slán, Slán agus Beannacht.